Alright, so now to go into the two new releases from this past week, we go back to Netflix and back to just regular streaming. Um, we're going to start with the Netflix movie, which is Enola Holmes, which was another one of those things with Netflix where whenever you see like a Netflix advertisement, you're never quite sure if it's a movie or a show. Uh, and usually it's surprising to learn that it's a movie. So, despite the fact that it does come from a book series, which I am not familiar with at all, like I didn't even know if like of the existence of this series prior to this movie. So, and while I don't think it's the movie for like Holmes purists by any means, um, I had still heard really good things about it going in, but I just kind of figured that was another throwaway. Hey, it's on Netflix and they don't usually have good movies, so maybe people are just being, nice to it because it doesn't completely suck. But I was really surprised to find that it is one of those movies where those they don't come along like a lot, but those movies that are just so joyful about themselves that you're kind of in a better mood after having watched it. It's one of those. It's because we have Millie Bobby Brown as the star probably helps a lot because despite the period detail about it and the setting, she kind of has this perfect way of being like appropriate for the era, but there's also something really modern about her that doesn't clash too much with the era that it's set in, and it just kind of makes this perfect combination of the two, and makes her like instantly. Not only does that like instantly draw you to the character, but there's also the whole fourth wall breaking thing, which seems like, especially if you were to just like explain it or describe it, it would probably sound like really obnoxious or like really overkill because it's throughout the whole movie. But I actually kind of loved the fourth wall breaking thing from the get. Like I loved the first couple of times it happened because it was like the way it established either she's going to be talking to us directly or maybe she'll just look at the camera silently at just the right time. And the first couple of times it happened, it's like, oh, that's a really good technique, and the way it draws us in and makes us feel like we're like alongside her. And then it became a continuous thing through the whole movie. Under any got to the point to where under any circumstance we could be addressed by her, whether she's speaking directly to us, asking us a question, or just kind of reacting, like giving us a "Are you seeing this shit?" kind of look. And there's also some pretty dire moments where we get it. Like what I found really interesting was, which I kind of noticed after the fact, was that there's a couple of scenes where she's like crying and like really sad, and those are like the only like big emotions that she feels where she never addresses us. Almost like it's like shame that she feels that way. But if she's like, you know, caught up in something, whether she's in mid-action scene, whether she's like totally lost, whether she could potentially be about to be killed, there is always at least a point in time where she addresses us in one way or another. um, and I was amazed how much that worked through the whole thing. And our point of view could be from any perspective. We could be anywhere in the moment, up to and including underwater, apparently. um, and I really love that technique. And like I said, it's a way to really, it's really engaging to the point that we constantly feel like we're there. It's almost like, especially since there's so many times where she does it without dialogue, it's like you keep watching because you never want to miss a moment where she might address us in some way. So that was something that could have been really overkill. That I thought they really held on to nicely because there's on top of that there's just like an energy and a liveliness to it in general where in a movie like this that might be seeming like it's geared towards a younger audience, usually when something's like really lively or energetic, you can get a sense of like a hollowness in it because it's like they're just doing that so they can maintain the attention spans of a younger audience. But no, it's able to do that without like, because usually when you do that you're like sacrificing wit and putting it in place of it, but this one is able to have both and pretty much like they pretty much go hand in hand, which is great. Like it's not necessarily even just that we'll do this for the younger audience, then this for the older audience. Like, both of those things just kind of mesh together through the whole thing. And I can't really think of one instance where it felt like one was geared more towards the other, except for some surprising violence in it. I mean, it's not like, super over the top violence or anything. It's not like Hit Girl fighting Mark Strong or something. It's it's more like Burn Gorman is playing this like henchman of sorts that is trying to kill her and her companion through most of the movie, and he just randomly pops up, and they get into actual physical fights with this guy. This is like, I don't know if people remember who Burn Gorman is by name. He's the guy that was always with Charlie Day in the Pacific Rim movies, and he was in The Dark Knight Rises. He's the guy that goes through the ice. It's him physically fighting Millie Bobby Brown. And he's like, and they're not watering these down either. He's like throwing her into shit, but she's fighting back because she's been trained, and they're like full on fight scenes, which was really surprising. Like I said, and sometimes the violence is pretty hardcore for the kind of movie that it is. Like I said, that's not to say that it's like super over the top or anything, but it's yeah. So as far as the whole we see her training and stuff like that. There is the whole movie is set off by her relationship with Helena Bonham Carter, and I think she actually, who's ever like the girls that are playing Enola in flashbacks get more screen time with Carter than Millie Bobby Brown does, because it's the whole idea is that she just kind of disappears out of thin air, but manages to leave clues about where she might be and why she left. But the interesting thing that the movie does is that's the setup, but then the plot takes like an entire detour and just becomes a different plot. But that might sound like messy and like it doesn't really have much of a grasp on like going in a particular direction, but it's actually really well handled and makes the plot kind of unpredictable in a way, to set up this thing so easily. But the thing is, it's like the way we see how she was using, like the techniques she was using to investigate her mom's disappearance, and kind of using those same tactics for this kind of separate case that manages to branch off that she comes across really just by chance. And of course, it comes to her having to prove herself, because we do have Sherlock and Mycroft Holmes here, played by Henry Cavill and Sam Claflin. And the thing is usually when I hear Sam Claflin's name, I just kind of think like, well, it's probably a nothing role or nothing performance or something, because he just hasn't really. He was one of those actors where up until pretty much this movie, he was one of those. Even though I've seen like a bunch of movies that he's in, I whenever I hear his name, I still can't quite put a face with it. But this movie might help that from now on, even despite the fact that he's kind of hidden by a giant mustache. But he actually got to stand out here, because he's the one that's kind of really. Because Sherlock's the one that she kind of relates to more, and kind of she has more of a relationship with, and Mycroft is obviously the more like sort of prickly one, and the one that's like shunning her for basically being a girl and stuff like that, and saying she's out of her element and stuff like that. So really the whole thing is kind of her just kind of proving herself in general, not necessarily just to her brothers, even though that's certainly a driving force throughout it. And they're not here as much as one might think they are, especially given the casting of like Henry Cavill as Sherlock. You would think would be a big selling point, as I'm sure it has been. But it's really clearly a focus on her, and that's great, because it could have been, because you have the Sherlock character here, who's obviously the name. So it would have been really easy to set it up like it's a story about Enola Holmes, but then you just kind of keep going back to Sherlock, because that's who people would maybe want to see, because he's the bigger name as far as characters go. So I like that they actually had like they were able to rein that in enough to make him as much of a supporting character as he is, so that we can really get her side of it, because that's what the story really is. But like I said, when you have a big name character in it, sometimes stories that are meant to focus on somebody else tend to not be able to resist going back to the easy thing to work with. So yeah, and the fact that Millie Bobby Brown is so engaging as this character, I think plays a huge part in that, because oftentimes it's like you would go into a movie kind of thinking like, oh, I kind of this new character's nice, but I kind of prefer the character that we really know. But she's so instantly engaging that you don't really necessarily hope for those. Like, you're not waiting for, like, Sherlock and Mycroft to come back. Like you would be in a more with more standout supporting characters and recognizable supporting characters. So I think that's a real testament to the strength of what she brings to it and how well written the character is just in general. Especially since she's like actually genuinely heroic. Because it probably would have been easy for her to just kind of like the way she just kind of accidentally falls into the case. They actually use the fact that the story is about her having to prove herself, and there's this particular moment when she has to come to terms with the fact that she could go off on this different direction and leave this kid that she's met behind that's in peril that, Burn Gorman is chasing. But after that kid is almost killed by him before she intervenes, it occurs to her, he doesn't have the strength for this, and, I have the training, and, I have the detective skills and all that stuff, and it's like, he is going to die if somebody doesn't intervene. So if anybody's going to intervene, it might as well be me, because I already know the situation as well as anybody. And there's a whole sequence of her coming to terms with that before she's like, alright, I guess I'll do this thing. And I think that's another thing that kind of adds a strength to the fact that we kind of detour from the Helena Bonham Carter thing going on. But it all does find a way to come full circle, but not really in the way that you might expect. Like, you almost might think of this like really contrived thing where somehow they're gonna cross paths, but not really. At least not like big in the sense that you would imagine. So like I said, it's like you get a general sense about, stories like this just kind of in general. So the way they can a writer can go in and kind of tweak it to where it's not as predictable as you might think it would be, is always really refreshing to see. So that's great as well. And it's also very funny. It's one of those cases where you can tell how much you like a movie by how much you laugh at just the little shit. Because there will be a lot of movies that have a lot of comedic moments in them, but sometimes they're just so simple and just there. It's like in your head you acknowledge that was one of the funny things. But you don't like physically react or anything. But you're like, hey, there's a joke and there's that or whatever. And it usually takes like some sort of big payoff or some sort of, big joke or whatever to actually get you to laugh at it. And it's like you sort of find yourself just like audibly chuckling at just the random shit that's in there that you wouldn't normally necessarily laugh out loud at. And I think that just really comes with the whole, if it gets you early enough and has you really invested in it and you're just like just taking in every minute of it as something that's not like, it doesn't feel like there's any particular filler. Like, I can't think of a moment in the movie where I was like zoning out or something like that, because I was a little concerned because it's a little over 2 hours. It's like 2 hours and 3 minutes, and there is, like the last 20 minutes or so. There's one of those instances where we're looking at what appears to be the climax, and then like once all that's over, there's still like 20 minutes left, and that's usually alarming. But I actually found myself, because there was so much that they had to bring back, and like there were story points that they couldn't just abandon. That I found that I wasn't really that worried about. Like, even though it did feel like it kept going and going after the climax, I did want to know like how they were going to wrap up the rest of what was still open. Because I thought they were going to do something real cheap. I thought they were going to do like a Golden Compass kind of thing, where they just left it. But especially since it's a book series. But I like that they actually just decided to wrap it up. So it's like that extra 20 minutes I think actually is better than having just left it open and saying like, hey, maybe someday we'll make another one of these, or maybe not, it doesn't matter. So you could sense there was like an actual care in like the storytelling angle of it, and it wasn't necessarily just them trying to do some franchise thing or start some franchise thing or something, which we already know. There's way too many movies that try that and fail, and I like that this one is kind of like its own. I mean, certainly it's open to an extent, but like more or less story-wise, it's an open and shut thing. So that's once again another nice change of pace. So, and then there's just with any period movie, you're gonna notice that like period settings and stuff like that, and costume design and all that stuff, which is really great also. It is, if there's one thing that's kind of might be off, is that not only just the sets, but like the way they're shot. There's obviously going to be a lot of like cheap looking CGI, which honestly feels like it's really in any movie anymore. Like, it sucks to see it and notice it every time, but it's like, especially with like movies that are straight to streaming, you get a there's so much shoddy CGI everywhere in seemingly any kind of movie. And there's a lot here. There's a lot of really shoddy CGI in this also, but everything else works so much that you just kind of embrace it and just take it for what it is, I guess. And what they also do, even if cities or landscapes are seen in what appears to be crappy CGI. Once again, though, there's also the case of movies are so polished looking now. Sometimes something looks like shitty CGI, and you'll learn later that it wasn't. So we deal with that a lot too. So maybe, I don't even know. Maybe some of this shit is real, but it doesn't really look like it. But we do get like two different kinds of settings in particular, where it's like more of a countryside setting towards the beginning, and then later when she's like in London and in the city and stuff like that. And it is interesting how the way we see these things, where like the countryside aspect looks like really wide and vast and almost kind of empty and isolated, so that when she gets to the city it feels much more like it's so crowded. Even though it's the city, which is huge, it still feels there, it's so crowded that it almost feels compact in a way, which is really interesting and a really nice contrast to the earlier scenes with the more vast landscapes. So stuff like that works out also. So yeah, obviously, it's not. This might sound like a shitload of praise. I don't think it's like best of its kind in a long time kind of thing. But I do think it's absolutely a really refreshing take on it, and Millie Bobby Brown shows that she has definitely enough engaging qualities that she can carry a movie almost entirely. Like I said, especially when you have a Sherlock Holmes movie where Sherlock is in the back seat. That's kind of a hard concept to carry, especially for an actress that's 15 or 16. And the fact that she pulls it off is in the grand fashion that she does is really impressive. So yeah, I really like this. This is also the kind of thing that I can imagine seeing again down the road. It's the kind of thing that's also really easy to recommend. I can think of 5 people off the top of my head that I could probably recommend this to. But given that it's Netflix, very highly advertised and apparently extremely popular, that's probably not even going to have to. You're probably not even going to have to recommend it to people. They'll find it. It's right there. So there's that. Now let's go on to Ava, which is pretty much the kind of movie I was expecting it to be, though not always in a sense. I saw a poster for this a while back, and I just kind of automatically assumed by the look of the poster and the kind of movie that it was, or kind of movie that it looked like, that this was a Luc Besson movie. And what was really weird about that was I just basically convinced myself that it was a Luc Besson movie. I never actually researched it. I just kind of came to that conclusion in my head, and it was only a week ago that I realized that it's not. It's actually Tate Taylor, who has an interesting filmography, because he did he did Get On Up, which obviously has that amazing Chadwick Boseman performance. He did The Girl on the Train, which I love for obvious reasons. He also did, what the hell else did he do? He did The Help. This is his reunion with Chastain. And I was thinking he did one or two other things. And you'll notice with stuff like Get On Up and The Girl on the Train and stuff like that, that he is able to get, apparently, great performances out of his leading actors, despite the fact that, talking about Blunt or Boseman, the talent's already clearly there. So you kind of wonder how much of the work is actually him, because the movies around these great performances don't quite match up, and he has kind of proven to not be that strong of a director, at least in my opinion. So I was very concerned about him tackling action. Because if you're already, not that strong of a director when you do a biopic or a mystery, I don't know if action's the way to go, because action's something you really got to commit to if it's not going to come out like shit. And it turned out action wise a lot better than I would have assumed with his name on it. But it's not exactly perfect. But I don't know that anybody was expecting it to be. It kind of often has the not near to this like style, but towards the end, it was starting to dawn on me that it was kind of reminding me a lot of Soderbergh's movie Haywire. I don't know how many people remember this, but like I said, it's not, because this has a very distinct like Soderbergh fashion to where it definitely feels like a Soderbergh while also having like almost, I guess you could say, realistic action. It's been a while since I saw it, so I don't know how much of it might actually be, but this is more of an over the top kind of fashion. But I was just getting Haywire vibes kind of in general, and we have Chastain at the center of it as this sort of action star, and I have criticized a couple of Chastain performances in the past, at least, particularly ones where she had to kind of be a bit tougher. Like her performance in Zero Dark 30, I always thought came off kind of try hard, and Miss Sloane was kind of pretty much down the same path and with the same result. And I guess it's because like my favorite performance of hers is the Tree of Life, where she's like this sort of stoic motherly figure, and it's like it just kind of, I had a hard time buying for a long time her and like the hard ass kind of part. But despite those criticisms, I am a massive Chastain fan, just in general. Just maybe despite a couple of performances. But I am starting to warm up to her having more of like an image of like the badass. And this actually is helping. Like, you would think this would be one of the movies that kind of tries but fails, but no, she actually carries this really well and actually makes the character really believable. But the great thing is that she makes the character believable in multiple ways. Like, this is definitely a character with a bunch of different faces. And surprisingly, she's really able to pull that off. So, or maybe not so surprisingly, with the track record that Ted Taylor at least has with his leading performances, so there's that. But she has like this opening scene with Johan Gruffa where we get basically the vibe of her kind of having this stone cold killer image. Like, she has a human side because she always asks like, you know, her targets that she sent to kill, like what exactly it was they did, because she wants to understand it before she kills them, which is a very human thing to do, but she's absolutely completely stone faced the whole time, whether it be talking to them, learning what they did, and up to the moment of killing them. She just is emotionless. But then we get moments later where, and this is really interesting because this is not usually the kind of movie where the characters are the strength of it. Usually these kind of movies are like, they put all of their stuff into the action, they put all their effort into that, and then the characters are just sort of side things that just are there. Basically things to either be kidnapped or killed or run around or whatever. But the characters are the strength of this movie. The characters in this are significantly stronger than the action is, for the most part. So we have her mom is played by Gina Davis, who I was not expecting to see, apart from the opening credits, obviously giving it away. But I was not aware that she was in this, and it didn't occur to me until I was watching it how believable it is to see Gina Davis as Jessica Chastain's mom. Like, it actually works really well. And there's also her sister, who is Jess Wexler, who was the girl from Teeth, who is Chastain's best friend in real life. And if I didn't know they were best friends in real life, I would immediately think that that role was meant for Dakota Johnson, because it feels like she's basically playing it as Dakota Johnson. But no, they still have that. They play sisters relatively well, but it's kind of hard to tell because Chastain is basically playing the worst sister of all time through the whole thing. But the kind of combative nature of their relationship is definitely there for sure. But also, talking about this, we have, before we go into Malkovich, it's seeing her with her family in a movie that kind of shows you something, because where I was talking about she's basically like a stone-faced, emotionless killer, it's interesting how she can switch to, like, like when she's having her family problems, those are very believable also, and it's really believable that they're just two entirely separate lives in her mind because she's like two entirely different people. Like it's clear that she's struggling because they talk a lot in dialogue about how she used to have an alcohol problem and she used to have a drug problem, and she may or may not be on her way back to that. But that's the kind of thing is they set that up, and that's just what you see when she's with her family as somebody that struggled in the past with alcohol and drugs. You wouldn't immediately suspect this person's also a stone cold killer. In fact, you wouldn't suspect that at all. And I like the fact that that's not just like the character performing, but the way Chastain is able to separate the two also really actually works. But then yes, you've got another side of this where you have John Malkovich being in this, and shockingly, not only is John Malkovich like in a movie like this, like he often is, where they give him these throwaway parts, but it's actually not really a throwaway part. He actually gets some stuff to work with, and this was not the movie I was expecting to say that about, because Malkovich has been stuck in these like thankless roles for like way too long now, to the point that you almost forget just how talented he actually is, and the fact that he's one of the like actors of actors. And he actually gets some work because he's basically like, she's obviously missing that father figure in her personal life, so she's basically got him, and that probably sounds really, really cliche, and kind of amazing that that is not a throwaway part, because that has throwaway part for John Malkovich written all over it. But the scenes between them are actually really heartfelt, and you can sense so much history between them, and how he is so genuinely fatherly towards her while also being like her boss in this. It's really surprising how much it works. Maybe I was just like, maybe I'm just being too easy on this movie. I don't know, but I'm really surprised how much the whole character dynamic was like working for me. Because we've got another person I didn't know was in it until I saw their name in the opening credits, and that is Colin Farrell. And Colin Farrell is really good. Colin Farrell's basically our antagonist. Actually, he's definitely our antagonist. But the thing about it is, he has like scenes sporadically throughout the movie before he gets like super duper important. But the thing is in his first scene, his very first scene, it's only mildly established like exactly who he is and what his place is here in this story, until he kind of slowly reveals what his thoughts and intentions are throughout this first scene. And it's just them sitting on like his back porch, and they're like his son's christening is what they're at, and so like the least threatening place you could possibly be. And this scene, because of Farrell, is so tense, and this doesn't stop. Like Farrell's first two or three scenes, like my knuckles were actually, you hear about this in comments from critics or whatever, but my knuckles were actually white because because Colin Farrell has this thing that like he's able to play like threatening characters in a very forward way, but he also in some cases has what I like to call like subtle crazy eyes, where like he has this way of looking like normal Colin Farrell when he's just talking to you, but then his eyes will just do this sort of intense thing that's not too over the top. He's done, like if you look at Daredevil, he's done it in a very over the top way, but he's also got a very subtle way of doing crazy eyes, where it's like you're just talking to a dude in his house at his son's christening, and then he does one little look, and it's like, oh, this guy might very well kill me in front of his entire family, including his children. And you totally believe it, no matter who the character is. Where it's like, his first scene is with a character where there's no way he's going to kill this character this early or in this moment. But my mind and his performance totally convinced me that he might. And it was fucking scary. And like I said, every time we saw him, like the next couple of scenes he had, were so incredibly tense because of that. So that was fun. And then he does eventually get a fight scene in a place where you think that might not be what happens. Like you expect something drastic to happen, but you don't expect a full fight scene in the moment that we get it. And it's between two actors I would not have immediately suspected to have a fight scene in 2020. But it's a really cool scene. It's a scene like right out of Haywire is how it plays out, it feels like. Which, like I said, doesn't quite play it from the distance the way Soderbergh liked to do, which worked for that movie, but it still worked, and it's not too choppy in the way you get a sense of, modern action movies kind of like to do. Like, when I saw Malkovich in the role that he was in, I was really getting, like, Mile 22 flashbacks that I really didn't want. Like, I was really worried, but it's not like that at all. Which is really nice. If there's one character dynamic that really doesn't work, there's a character played by Common that has a crucial part here, but, like, the whole story with him wasn't really working. And it felt like really, really forced, and that kind of takes us into another direction where there's a major character played by Joan Chen, and just that whole side of the story just kind of felt unnecessary, and it kind of felt like the movie was coming to a stop whenever we went to it. Whether it be Common himself or that sort of separate, like, underground world that he's like a sort of gateway to in regards to how we're seeing the story. And not only does it feel forced in a character sense, but there's another fight scene that happens in this portion of the story, and when that fight scene comes, it's not near as effective as the Colin Farrell fight scene. This is a fight scene that feels like it comes from out of nowhere, and not necessarily the good way. It feels like one of those action scenes that's there just because, like, the studio got afraid that there wasn't enough action. Like, there was too long of a break between action scenes, so they just stuck this one in here. And it's awkward. It just feels awkward. And I wasn't really big on really any of that portion of the story, which kind of sucks, because quite a bit of time was devoted to it after a while, and it just goes in directions we really don't need the story to. And it gives us some background on Chastain, but even then, there's plenty of stuff is already established before we even get any of that stuff, so it's whatever. If there's one thing about those scenes, it's the fact that there is a surprisingly clever use of a portable toilet. And I know how weird that sounds, just saying it. It feels weird to say, but that's one upside, I guess, is that you can actually say something like that out of these scenes, but yeah. And then as far as her character goes and the troubles she goes throughout, obviously they tease once or twice, like, oh, is she going to fall back into drugs or is she going to fall back into alcohol? And it's like, with the kind of character that she is and the job that she has and the position that she's currently in and the kind of people that are coming after her, this would be the worst time ever to fall back into a drug habit or alcoholism. And you kind of think, like, you kind of dread the moment where that might happen, because you're like, that's going to take this movie in a direction that it kind of doesn't need to go in. It's going to stop us dead in our tracks if they go down that path. So you just kind of wait for that. And I will just say that it's such a... I can see there being a lot of criticism for when they decide to bring back the alcoholism. Because it's very late in the game, but I actually thought it was really inspired, the place that in the story that they chose to bring back the alcoholism. Is it like the most unexpected time? So I actually really admired that, kind of. Like, I can see criticism for it saying, like, really, this is when you're going to bring that storyline back? But I was just kind of impressed with the balls of bringing it back in the moment they bring it back in. So, yeah, that's how I feel about that. And yeah, the climax was especially where I was getting Haywire vibes. So if you found that sort of thing satisfying, the ending is... There's actually a portion of the ending where I just unexpectedly started to laugh. And I think that's the reaction you are supposed to have. So I'll just say that. Where it's like, it gets really hardcore, there's a fight scene, there's a big action scene, there's a shootout, and then there's like one more portion to finish the climax off, and it's really took me by surprise by how funny this moment is. And so, yeah, there's that. And like I said, intentionally funny, for sure. You can tell. And so, yeah, I was, even though I didn't care for, like, the common slash Joan Jen storyline that was taking us in directions they really didn't need to go in, and they kept stopping the movie, um, it was weird how much I was into this. Like I said, maybe I'm being too kind to it, but I don't care. I can't. I mean, if I feel this way, that's the way it is. And it's not even necessarily like, I'm not even that undiscriminatory towards action movies. Like, I used to be at a point, but I'm just so sick of shitty action movies at this point, especially shittily edited ones. It's, yeah, I feel I was all prepared to maybe at best say this was a guilty pleasure, but I would go so far as to say there's plenty of things in this movie that are genuinely good, not just in the guilty pleasure sense. Even though there is some stuff in it that just shouldn't be there, or it's just kind of shit. But yeah, and I will say, great as the climax is, I'm not a big fan of the last 10 seconds of the movie. Like, literally the last 10 seconds before it cuts to credits. That I'm not really that big of a fan of, and it's kind of predictable in a way, but it's also just yeah. I mean, I get it why that kind of ending could work, especially with the way the story gets us to that last 10 seconds, but I don't know. I'm just not really a fan of ending it there, so I'll just say that. Yeah, yeah, I really like both of these. One has got the critical acclaim to back it up. One, I haven't checked on Ava's critical acclaim. I'm going to assume critics probably didn't care for this, if I had to guess. And I'm probably a lot of people won't also, but or regular moviegoers, I guess I should say. uh, so yeah, but I'm quite a big fan of both of these. Even like I said, if Ava has its shortcomings, I feel like it's kind of those are overshadowed by the stuff that actually surprisingly works. So yeah, maybe the thing is you have to set the bar really low. I don't know, but like I said, I usually do that with action movies today for the most part, and it's still really worked for me, especially on a character front, because that was just unexpected. So yeah, so whatever the next thing is, I think we're pretty much be in October by the time this video sees the light of day, and then obviously there's a whole calendar of things planned for October, so we'll be getting to all of that stuff. And versus from just myself and me and my brother and all that other stuff. So all of that usual shit will be here. So until all that, I think that's it for this.